Hey friends, question today is, do glazes expire? Meaning, will my old glazes that have sat on the shelf for 4 years still work? I'm not quite sure. I hope they do, but today's video we're gonna find out. So one of the best things I've ever done as a potter is studied glaze chemistry. So I invested a good amount of time around 2019, 2020 in studying glazes. I studied with Ceramic Materials Workshop, so Matt and Rose Katz. They are the best, hands down, the authority when it comes to learning anything about clay, glazes, the chemistry. They're awesome. Highly recommend their classes. After studying glaze chemistry, I was able to formulate a good library of all of my own glazes, which I love, and I can feel confident in them. I know that they are stable. I know that they are not toxic. I know that they won't run. However, what I don't know is if they've sat on the shelf for 4 years, are they still gonna behave like I wanted, like they used to behave when I made them? Things that I'm going to use, I have a very large immersion blender. This is great for mixing up glazes. I have a handful of test tiles that these will be used to actually do tests, to actually dip and test. I use a hydrometer to test the thickness or the viscosity of my glazes. And I've got a bunch of different glazes. The first one I'm going to take a look at is a glaze I call Linden Pink. I have that over here in this container. And let's see what it looks like. I haven't opened this in 4 years. It doesn't want to open. Oh my goodness, this is going to be part of the fun. Half the battle this whole afternoon is just going to be getting the lids off because, as you can see, this one particularly has gotten quite gross and it gets really crusty, and then it makes it difficult to get the lid off. One of the things I'm initially very curious to see is if the glaze has hard panned at all, which means basically all the solid materials of the glaze have settled down at the bottom and it's become like a very thick, hard substance that will be hard to stir up. Now you can see a little bit how it has separated. There's definitely some more water setting on top of the glaze, but I'm very curious to see if it's going to be difficult to mix back up. So I'm just going to go straight in with my hand. Oh, it's very slimy. It's very slimy, it's very thick, but it is not hard panned at all. I can actually scrape the bottom of the container just fine. So I'm happy about that. What I'm gonna do is go ahead and take my immersion blender and just mix it up. Okay. Woo! Okay. I am gonna wear safety glasses just in case any glaze splatters black at me. Just good practice anyway. So I'm going in. Thing unfortunate about this first glaze that I'm mixing up is that I made no notes of the viscosity of this one. So I'm not going to make any changes to this particular glaze as it is. I'm just going to dip a test tile in it and fire it and see how it comes out. And I know from my last test tile, my last sample of this glaze, what it should look like. So I should be able to get a sense for if it's too thick. It feels very thick, but I'm just gonna go ahead and test it like this. The best things to have if you get into glaze chemistry and glaze testing is this little underglaze pencil. So I can write on the bottom of each of these tests the glaze and the date and all that. So I'm gonna write Linden Pink name of the glaze. Not sure if you'll be able to see that or not. And the date. Test it right after it's been stirred up. And I'm gonna do, I think I typically do like a 6-second dip. So 1 1000, 2 1000, 3 1000, 4 1000, 5 1000, 6. Okay. Our first one is done. So this glaze, this pink, is also known as a zinc pink because it uses zinc in the recipe. And it's just kind of a cool chemistry thing. One of the smart things previous Lisa did when she batched this glaze is she made a note of the specific gravity. And I'm going to show you the way that I test a specific gravity, and we're going to see if I get the same number as I did when I originally batched this. So what I'm going to do with this one, because I have the ability to validate and see if the thickness, if the viscosity of this matches what I had when I first batched it, I'm just going to pour this into a measuring cup. only because it makes it easier to pour into this beaker. Then what I do, I get my little hydrometer. It's called a precision hydrometer, and I don't know why I adopted this as my methodology for measuring glaze viscosity, glaze thickness. I just did. I learned about it somewhere a long time ago, and this is what I do. So, hey friends, future Lisa. I'm realizing at this point in the video that a little bit more explanation might be helpful. I tend to use specific gravity and viscosity sort of interchangeably, and I want you to know that I do know that there's a difference, that it's not the same thing, but in my mind they're kind of the same thing. But here's what the deal is. Specific gravity is the measure of how dense a liquid is, and that's truly what I'm measuring with this hydrometer. Viscosity is the measure of how fast a liquid will flow, and kind of a measure of like how sticky the liquid is. Not entirely the same thing, but for me, measuring the specific gravity of my glazes gives me a good indication of how it's going to apply or adhere to my bisqueware. Application of glazes is almost as important as any other concept when it comes to glazing, and so that's why I'm fairly particular about checking my glazes before I apply them. I want to make sure that they're going to be applied consistently, and the way that I can do that, the way that I found to do that, is by measuring the specific gravity or the density of a glaze. So the way this hydrometer works is that it's essentially a glass bubble, a long skinny glass bubble with a weight at the bottom. Thicker liquids, it'll float, but it'll float higher up, and at thinner liquids like water, it'll float lower down. So water technically has a specific gravity of 1. So when I drop this into a bucket of water, and I had to get the tallest bucket I could so that it wouldn't bottom out, but when I drop this into water, what you'll see is that it starts floating, and it floats right at that 1 mark. Okay, now because we know glaze is going to be denser, inherently going to be denser because it's got a lot of material in it, we know it's not going to sink. It's going to still float. This will still float, but it's going to float a lot higher up. And so that's the reason why I use this guy, because I know that my glaze probably is going to start floating somewhere around, I guess at the most it would be at this 3.5, 4 line here. And so I know that it's not going to bottom out in this cylinder, right? So I only have to fill this up to about, the very top, or the top of the marking here. That's just because I've done it several times and I know. But I only need to fill it up to about here. That gives me enough liquid so that this won't bottom out and I can get a measurement on it. A lot of times my buckets of glaze, I don't have this many inches of glaze in the bottom of it that I could just drop this right in the bucket. So if I did have enough glaze material, I could certainly just drop this into the container that I have the glaze in. It would work great. I have less material, so I have to put it into a smaller container that has more vertical space so that I can get the reading without it bottoming out. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And this basically just measures how far down. We'll see how far it's gonna. Okay, so what this is showing me is that the hydrometer is sinking down right to the 1.75 line, roughly. And what I know from what the note I made for myself when I batched this is that it actually dropped down to the 1.52 line on the hydrometer, which means that this is a lot thicker than when I batched it. Now the question is it thicker because it needs water? Is it thicker because it needs to be dispersed? First thing I'm going to try is adding a dispersant. Instead of putting a dispersant in the whole glaze batch here, I'm just going to add it a little bit to my measuring cup here, so that if that's not what it needs, I'm not adding dispersant when I don't need to. The dispersant that I have, or the deflocculant, whatever you want to call it, is Darvan number 7. There's other dispersants out there. I think, is it sodium silicate? Double check on that one. That's another one that you can use. This is something that's readily available and easy to find in the US. And what I'm going to do is just take a little bit of this is a quarter teaspoon. I'm not going to use all that. I'm just going to put a couple drops in to start. I can already tell it feels waterier, which is good. That tells me that it was definitely, had gotten flocculated. This is actually a very, very common thing that happens to glazes. So if you're working in a community studio and there's a note next to the glaze buckets that says do not add water, that's why. Because you don't want to add water if you don't need to. So I'm going to do the same test again. All right, we are now at about 1.69, so it has gotten better. I'm going to add a couple more drops of Darvan. Drop this down. It's very, very good. So this is 1.52. This is probably 1.53 or 54. I'm good with that. So I'm not going to add any water to this glaze. I am a bit surprised that all it was for this one, at least, was that it had settled and it had flocculated and it just needed some dispersant. I would have figured over 4 years there would have been some evaporation of water, but now I'm not quite done yet because I'm going to put this back into the big container, and I might need to add a little bit more Darvan. So let's do that. So I have the note on my tile. Second glaze is down. Just have like, I don't know, a gajillion more to do. That was exhausting, but I did get all of my dipping / pouring glazes remixed up and tested. I'll admit on the last couple ones I didn't check the glaze thickness or viscosity because I was getting tired. And they had the same base formula as several others, so I'm just gonna assume that all they needed was the same as the other ones that I did check. And I went ahead and dipped them, and we'll test them, and I guess we'll find out. It's getting late in the day, so I'm gonna stop there. I've gotten all of my dipping glazes and dipping / pouring glazes mixed up, a test tile for each one to see where it's at. I have a bunch of small batch glazes, I call them my small batches, but I think I'm gonna save these for tomorrow. I'm gonna go ahead and open each one tomorrow and see where they're at and do a little brush test for each of those. But I'm gonna save that for tomorrow because I'm tired. Okay, friends, second day. Moving on from testing all of my dipping glazes and pouring glazes. I didn't mention this yesterday, but I did make a note of all the modifications that I made to each glaze. For the most part, I just added, some of them I didn't change anything. Some of them I added Darvan to, as you saw. And I just made note of which glazes and how much Darvan I had to add. So I have that as a reference for later. For all of my little small batches of glazes, again, these are glazes that I either mixed up as just a test because I wanted to see how the color came out or whatnot. And I saved it because I liked it and I thought it could be used for like a decorative element. Some of my smaller glazes, batches of glazes, are actually the same glaze, the same dipping glaze. I just added some CMC gum to it to make it brushable. So for these glazes, I think I'll still do a little test, but if they don't come out or something is weird about it and the dipping glaze does come out, I can just easily remake a little bit of brushing glaze. So I hope that makes sense. All right, so for these, I'm not going to test the specific gravity because they've all been modified. They've all had an additive to it to make them better for brushing. And so I'm just going to mix them up and then brush a little bit on. I think I'm going to use just an old plate that's been bisque fired, but I didn't do anything with it, so I still have it. And I'm just going to do a little brush test for as many glazes as I can on this one plate. Let's start with Pitkin. So I have heard that when you add CMC gum to a glaze to make it brushable, that it rots and stinks. Oh, I don't know. This one smells just fine. A good old kitchen blender. Ooh, right. We're doing all right. All right, so on my plate, I'm just gonna write the name of the glaze, and I'm gonna try and fit as many little tests as I can on here. So I'm gonna do, I'll work to the outside in. Whenever I brush, I usually do 2 or 3 coats. So for this guy, I'm gonna do a big square. Should be 1 coat. And then I'm gonna let it dry. And then 2/3 of the way down, I'll do a 2nd coat. And then 1/3 of the way down, I'll do a 3rd coat. And then in this one little square, after it fires, I'll be able to see kind of how 2 coats, 3 coats look. And then I can make a note to myself or on the glaze container here to do however many coats is most appropriate. So. I got all of my little brushing glazes. Okay, not all of them, that's a lie. I got all but 2. 2 of those small containers did not want to open. And I tried as hard as I could. I smacked them on the ground, all the stuff, but the lid was just stuck and I just couldn't be bothered to try anymore. One of them is a dipping glaze, so I can easily remake that. And then another one I have the recipe for, and I just figured another day I will deal with that one. But I got, let's see what, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19, 20, 21 glazes. And I got them to fit on 2 plates as tests. So now, it's time to pull out my little test kiln here and get her plugged in. And I'm gonna see if I can fit those 2 plates and all the test tiles from my dipping tests in here and get it fired up tonight. So I actually had to raise up, I had to use taller kiln posts here so that it would elevate the 2nd shelf so that I can put my plate on top of it without it touching the thermocouple. So now in glaze fires, you usually never stack things, but the top of this is gonna be unglazed, the bottom of this is unglazed, so I am gonna stack this because there's just effectively no other way for me to fit this in. To get her kicked on, I typically just use the easy fire settings. I have programmed different firing schedules before, but for these glazes, I just want them to get up to a cone 6. So I'm gonna use the fast glaze cycle. So get that going. I'm gonna say cone 6, that's what it was on last time. Enter, no hold, just letting it go up. I'm not gonna hold it. And click the start. And then when you hear it click, all right, it's kicked on. So we will check back in probably about 12 hours. Kiln is at a more than acceptable temperature to open up, and we will finally answer the question, will my glazes still work after they've sat on the shelf for 4 years? I know you're all dying to see. Here we go. Ooh, see how much that plate shrank? I could barely fit it in here with my fingers when I put it in, but she's a little warm. Looking good. So far, so good. Ooh, look at that purple. I love that purple so much. Baby girl did a good job. So maybe a little overconfident when I put this in the kiln, because I stacked these two plates on top of each other, and I know I told you they're not gonna stick. There's no glaze. They totally stuck. It is just raw clay on raw clay, but they did still fuse together a lot. This happens when you fire lids on top of lids and stuff, so usually, there we go. Didn't even crack the plate. I mean, this is just a test anyway, but it was fine. Crisis averted, but they fired just fine as well. And so far, all of the colors look very expected. So honestly, this is a fantastic result. So for the most part, every single glaze that I tested looks exactly like it did 4 years ago. This is the test that I just did. This was the original glaze, and side by side, they're nearly identical. In fact, I would say most of them are completely identical. There's a slight variation, probably just in thickness, and that has to do with application, not the chemistry. So I'm super happy. As far as all the glazes that were brushed, they also are exactly the same. So the glazes that I had both dipping and brushing, there's no difference. So if we look at this purple glaze, for example, on the plate, I hope you can kind of see, I hope the camera's showing that, it might not be, but like this purple that was dipped looks identical to what's on the plate. Again, just variations in how thick they were applied. So it's a little thinner here because I maybe didn't get 3 full coats. But this green that you see in the middle, it's exactly the same color. So this orange, you can tell the dipping and the brushing came out identical as far as the color and the chemistry goes. So not the most exciting glaze test I've ever done, to be honest. I did kind of think that some of the glazes would not come out maybe as vibrant. That was kind of my going in hypothesis, particularly like the reds and the purples that kind of rely on a particular chemical reaction to get that color. But I am pleased because this means that I don't need to rebatch any of the glazes that I already have. And I think it was also very important just for me to have this level of confidence in my glazes. I was a little bit worried about them having sat on the shelf for so long that they might not behave, and I didn't want to put glaze on all this wonderful bisqueware that I have behind me and then not have it come out in the kiln. That would be very disappointing. So testing is very important. This was a worthwhile test, but I can also answer your question. If anyone wants to know, will old glazes still work? I'm gonna say probably. But do your own test to be sure. Thank you so much for spending the time and hanging out with me. I hope that this was interesting to you. The next video, I think I'm going to show you how I glaze these dragonfly mugs. I call them kind of a stained glass dragonfly. If you're interested in seeing that, maybe give me a subscribe. I think if you hit that bell, it'll tell you when that video is available. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the next one. Guys, take care. Have a great day. Bye.